So I was speaking in the last video about just some general considerations which adhere in the present and adhere generally, it turns out, in an extended present which encompasses the ancient past as we know of it from archaeology and history, as well as in the depth of the present as it extends into many of the institutions and other structures of society and their substructures, thought of not merely as the objective investiture of organizations and their protocols, but also the flow of information and resources which are prerequisites for the existence of the superstructures built upon those processes. So in other words, it's about funding streams, it's about information streams, these being either in both cases valid and genuine or invalid and fraudulent, whether they are used properly or misused, by whom and for what reason, all included. In general, what was said was that basically a massive fraudulent enterprise is being conducted, massively fraudulent to the point of having a metaphysically determinable character. We're not talking about exceptions to the rule here, we're talking about the rule to which we find virtuous and proper conduct to be the exceptions. And indeed, we find that the rule in those cases are that they are framed and misrepresented as being exactly what they aren't. So, and sometimes, if possible, wherever it would seem, framed and pretended, calumniated against to be seen in the facile and vapid public eye in all of its platforms of manipulation as being exactly the character which should be properly ascribed to those conducting those charlatanous acts. The charlatans are in charge of the insane asylum, and they have decided to promote to the status of the epitome of their made-up mental diseases anybody who would refuse to submit to their arbitrary and absurd mockery of authority. In that situation, it's no wonder that a fraud like psychiatry can exist and flourish as long as it has, when the criticisms leveled against it, especially by Thomas Saz, who should be dubbed a saint, are so substantive and ironclad. It just proves, when you look at the connections of each of these facets of what we see in society to be fraudulent endeavors, like the counterfeiting racket that's taking place in this and other Western countries, so that the economy is a staged, a controlled event rather than an actual economy of the distribution of wealth as determined freely by the agents all participating in that enterprise. Instead, it's a controlled, rigged pseudo-event. It's a staged mockery of what should have been the case, yet it is still named for it because it has completely superimposed itself over all the possible loci of opportunity for its competition to occur. So, in the case where we could have had an actual free market economy, we have no actual free market economy. Every potential for that to manifest has been made impossible by the already enduring racket, which basically takes its place and displaces it from even possibly existing by manipulation of a fraudulent currency, its embezzlement, its weaponization through covert programs which are only, at best, facetiously implied to be for the sake of national security. You've got various techniques, methodologies, which are employed, which are extensions, technological augmentations of already existing ancient modalities of coercive power. In order to instigate coercion effectively, it has sometimes been, and often is, more and more, as the opportunity becomes more and more solidified in our modern age, that the existence of authority, public authority, is a complete racket. I'm going to demonstrate this very thoroughly, and there's not going to be any doubt, based on the evidence, that in fact we're living in a completely racket-controlled simulacrum of what should be a proper and free society. It should be noted that in that case, we would expect to find that it would pay heavy lip service to all the ideals which it completely, and with complete hypocrisy, actually cannot substantiate and has no merit for claiming to be the basis of their own actions. Basis of their actions are nothing other than the motives that have ever convinced anyone to operate fraudulently, which is to gain far more than they deserve for far less, and sometimes for nothing at all, or even in fact to penalize others for not granting them, which is to say, to imply that it's a wrongdoing to them if they don't receive what they want. It's not merely to get what they want for free, as an opportunist would have it, but it's to have a systematic racket going on where, for example, protection racket. I'm going to protect you from trouble in the hood, yet if you don't pay up your dues, I'm going to be the trouble in the hood that you're going to want me to protect you from. Basically, my left hand will give you the problem, my right hand will give you the solution. Looking into how that methodology extends into the issues of our fraudulent economy, it's not a far search before we find all the necessary features for claiming to have found the same process by analogy to be manifesting in areas of finance or the logistics of economic activity in any of its forms. I'm going to find, first of all, counterfeiting and other forms of falsification at the upper tiers of these enterprises, and then you're going to find embezzlement in order to propagate the resources to their intended beneficiaries, as well as to mitigate them against those that will be penalized for not going along with the racket. Nepotism is just one anciently known mode of this, where the obviously, given that some particular position of space and time within an urban economic environment, even in the ancient past, was occupied by a given group of people, instead of that being an opportunity for anyone else who would prove to be, let's just say, ideally better co-participators in that enterprise, instead, who are selected but those who, for some reason specious to the occasion of that, what that enterprise claims to be about, a better product or service for all who have the right to partake of it. Instead, it is an opportunity for the ensconcing into a condition of security and enhanced prosperity for those that they choose, such as their family members and friends and others, without regard to any ideal or proper consideration of ideals or of any actual objective criterion which specifies that they are actually fit for the work, or that the product or the service will be improved per se, or that or further that the beneficiaries would be the customer, basically, or the persons who benefit from the service and the good by offering something in trade. So an example of such a racket, besides the protection racket, in economic terms, let's just say, and I'm not going to name a specific business, but let's just say that a whole spectrum of businesses could be involved. Let's just say that some of them could be grocery stores, some of them could be cafes, some of them could be clothing outlets, some of them could be other venues for entertainment or for various other consumer activities like drinking, bowling, gambling, whatever. Whatever the activity, let's just say that a specific interest was at stake in each of these different categories of economic activity, such that it could be found that at least one brand or at least one corporate entity or at least one privately owned and operated business venture would find that it suited them to operate as part of a racket in the following way. Persons at large in the community, in the economic system, for lack of a better description, let's just say that that includes the possibility that it is a completely falsified economic system. It's not necessarily a proper economic system, but it's just the de facto, de jure economic system. It may not be de re in nature beyond a certain point. It may be superficially a proper economic system, but underneath it there may be an entire substructure of manipulation. Let's just say that regardless of whether that's the case or not, that this specific enterprise in each category happens to have something in common with all the others, such that a set of one of each in the entire spectrum of the economic system finds it to their advantage to network on some level so as to cooperate, so as to support some grouping of social sets in the public at large in the following ways: that if they conduct themselves according to some system which can measure and judge their participation in the expected activities expected of them in this racket, then they will be rewarded by discounts and benefits from these outlets of goods and services. So that, in effect, every aspect of their lives could be catered to better and better the more thoroughly and more efficiently they participated in said programs of racketeering activities. This could be any type of activity, just as long as it was satisfactory to those who managed the racket. I'm not going to name any clothing outfitters or any particular cafes or any particular institutions of higher learning or anything like that, nor any government agencies. Let's just say that it's conceivable that in all those cases, and in every case of ordered human action, with economic and socio-cultural transactions at stake, that this could occur, this could be organized, and that the motive is clear, that the method is clear, and that the opportunity is evident. What would be missing would be an open and honest admission of these activities, which would be consistent with the racket, because this would dispel people's good faith in those what are now to be recognized as front operations for a racket. It would cause an immediate disenfranchisement of their public respectability as good businesses, just doing business as presented, with nothing under the table, nothing in the back room or in the cellar that's inappropriate, right? And what would end up happening was the only persons who would support the racket would be those who participated in it. They would lose all their money from the rest of the public. They would have to be completely subsidized by that little in-group, which are the primary beneficiaries of whatever they have to offer. If that were ever to be the case, then those businesses would either go out of business, or their funding streams would have to be amplified to be consistent with their reported earnings as respectable economic entities instead of as completely propped up facades. Okay? So either the funding streams would be more and more demonstrable, covert funding streams perhaps coming from, any entities interested in conducting those rackets, and that would hurt them more because it would be harder for them to maintain their racket profitably. And most certainly not least because they would be less able to conduct their racket at all, because it would no longer be as covert as desired. And obviously the benefit of a racket is that its mechanism is covert to the majority of persons who will come into contact with it. Only the beneficiaries may be allowed to know, or if not directly allowed to know, allowed to benefit from it in such a way that they would be willing to look the other way almost on an instinctive level anyway. These kinds of activities, which can and do exist, and the list of companies that would be suspected as fronts for those activities, would not be hard to generate based on facts that can be discovered in the public domain very easily. And as far as the process overall that they're interested in, you might call it social engineering, you might call it political influence, you might call it specious self-aggrandizement as an insulating force against the vicissitudes of chance and fate, which would normally accrue in a true free market. So basically, they're insuring themselves against everyone else unfairly by using these practices to do it. For example, insurance companies that don't have to compete. This is a very specific example, which would be less controversial than the ones that I'm really alluding to. They don't have to compete, and they work with the state to ensure that laws stipulate that their customers must participate in their service and must pay the rates that they give, which would be in a way that helps inflate the profits of these groups in a way that would have been impossible to achieve if they couldn't have those agreements with the state, and if they were forced to compete with each other at a rate that allowed new participants in that specific domain of the market. And there may be issues also involved in the question of whether or not such services can be legally required of people to purchase, and so that could also be a factor for the industry as a whole, whether or not it is highly competitive. So in other words, as long as these overall mechanisms of activity can be detected, then that specific area of human action can be suspected properly of being involved in some form or fashion of racket. And justifications for a racket cannot possibly ever be used to excuse the existence of the racket, and it cannot exculpate those who participate in it from being racketeers, and it cannot also justify the damages done to people who had to suffer under the as it were, the Damocles sword of fraud and corruption, which must go hand in hand with racketeering of any kind, and the ruin of their society and the world around them by it being deformed from what it should have been, quite simply, on a larger scale than could have ever been achieved by a single person's deluded way of going about their life or lifestyle. So we're talking about very large scale, high crimes and definitely approaching a level of menace equivalent to organized criminal societies that have been severely punished by the American public through its institutions of law enforcement in the past, and probably far greater in deservingness and far greater in the damage done in the cases to which I'm alluding. Of course, to actually compile the empirical evidence from the historical and the modern databases of examples which accrue in the history books, the empirical anthropological studies, to the extent that those are even decipherable as valid investigations into anything. The current events monitors in the media, as well as in the literature of watch groups and other interested organizations, is really quite an undertaking that borders on a scholarly effort, for which I'm not, in the current circumstances, properly in a situation to undertake. Doesn't mean that it isn't something preeminently suitable for being undertaken by honest persons who want to uncover wrongdoing and fraud in their societies and in the world around them, rather than just endure them and look the other way and rationalize that under various guises as being the better approach, the more pragmatic one, or the more appropriate one in any way, which is utter bullshit. It's just the cowardice of not wanting to be involved in the conflicts going on and trying to slink by and slide by as skulkers on the battlefield, because there's nothing but a battlefield between the honest and dishonest, which is taking place in this case. So that this is a stage for all the human action which we normally see and describe in the world, and it is not a specious interpretation of the same. Whereas those I'm speaking of here, the ones who want to the look-away artists, they want to say that any given activity which might be involved in these rackets in order to coercively reinforce their success, such as by targeting individuals who openly oppose in one way or another their existence, they'll explain them away saying, oh, that could be just because this, it could be just because that, it could be just because the other. And so at that rate, with friends like that, who needs enemies? These people will line up to the defense of the racket just by rationalizing away any possible instance of its manifestation. I mean, they might not be directly involved because of their cowardice, so that they haven't ever been a proper target of these activities, but which are tantamount to counterintelligence and corrosive activities as seen in Stasi East Germany after World War II. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't have the humane intuition to put themselves in the shoes of another describing what's going on in their life, and instead of always going, that could be just because XYZ, going, I can see how that could be ABC. So basically you have people who are just going to always look the other way as long as they get away with it and nobody ever harasses them or bothers them. And they're the people that we would say are lying low. And if you want to lay low and be a coward in the battle for a just and proper existence, in other words, you don't want to have the character it takes to stand before the throne of an ultimate authority and say, yes, I was honest and did what was right for its own sake, no matter what the bribe or the threat. That can be your problem, but you're not going to get my respect, and or my acceptance, and you are going to get my just judgment against you, and I will testify against you in front of that throne and put my soul at stake, and take an eternity of woe if I'm wrong. Otherwise, that's what you're going to get. I'll take that risk, and you're just going to slink away, and you're going to have the judgment against you in absentia. But you're going to be forced to lift up your chin and face that judgment, even though in this world you look down at your shoes and act like you don't see what's going on. Now, those who are involved in these rackets, whatever they may be, and whatever the interested parties may be, and whatever the agendas may be, could be any number of them. Could be just inflating their profits, could be being part of a covert techno-tyrannical social engineering project. Who cares what the actual agenda is? The activity, the criminal activity, the racket is the observable behavior that cannot be condoned and is punishable by law. It's a detectable effort to fraudulently behave as if one had equal rights to pursue agendas in public, in spite of the fact that one uses that as a cover to conduct racketeering activities. Doesn't matter what your proclaimed motive or agenda is. So given national security or any others, it's all notwithstanding. It goes against the very nature of what's understood to be the justice system under the aegis of the Constitution as its guarantor for being something that all parties contracted to in this political domain called the United States of America have agreed. I haven't agreed to rackets being conducted in my best interest or in any other interest. So people are going to continue to participate in these rackets. They have to understand that, first of all, look, you're not invisible. People do detect what you're doing, do pick up on the fraudulent aromas which exude from the filthy and infested energy that is at the root of your behavior and your conduct. We can see when you're trying to pull one or another type of unjust action, and then we can put it into a context which makes the most sense out of it. I mean, even if it was just going on its own, it would have to be explained as just a certain group of people consistently being creeps and assholes instead of minding their own business and getting on with it. But want to mind, say, take myself as an example, my business. And they want to take an excessive interest in me, which is not invited or solicited by me, and which is against the grain of any of my expressed signs concerning the question, and in doing so are basically harassing. They're beleaguering somebody for time and attention against their express wishes and interests. I have said that it's not in my interest and I don't wish it, and they continue trying to insinuate themselves through all these little boogers they can scrape up off the street, give them a little, a fiver of some illicit drug or some other favor. Like I say, you can get apparently coupons to shop at certain places, perhaps in some deep internet or super encrypted private channels of information transaction, which could be built into specialized cell phones adapted for that purpose with an app that suits that firmware so that it wouldn't be recognizable in the public domain as anything that actually exists, but it would still be a networked communication system just for that racket. And who knows, maybe what your job is depends locally on whoever it is that's your local handler, and they could franchise it. I mean, there are people who would be willing to participate in this with the knowledge that they will be disavowed, and that both by those who have handled them as well as by the public authorities to which they might try to appeal to say, look, I've been involved in this, I want out, these people, what they're doing I think is wrong, etc. Well, it just turns out that you're appealing to the largest racket of all to help and protect you from a local franchise that's been given permission by them through certain particular branches of their presumed authority to operate in these racketeering manners in the public domain, so that you're actually confusing the issue in the same way that some of your targets do, who think that there's actually someone to appeal to in order to deal with your shenanigans, when in fact the persons to whom they would appeal, legal system, certain other public institutions of various forms of presumed authority, are in on it and are gained from the continuous exercise of these illegal actions. So, you find yourself getting a taste of the same if you try to get out or discontinue your service in that way. But in fact, that going on, even though you may continue it thinking, for example, that you'll get away with it or that your cause is just or whatever bullshit you use to rationalize your misconduct, these are noted by many people who see you for what you are. Their intuitions are on, they're turned on, they're tuned in, and they're not going to look the other way, and they're not going to rationalize what you're doing, and they're not going to bend to your will in any way that apparently accords with your intent in conducting these activities. They're not going to cow to you, and they're not going to bend to your will. And you're going to have to continue to work uphill to concoct bullshit excuses for what you've been up to, and you're going to have to continue hiding behind plausibly deniable guises, or guises that amplify your plausible deniability of what you really are and what you're really doing. You're going to have to continue the hard work of being pure hypocrites. And you're going to continue to be seen for what you are and judged for what you are, not just by those who are affected by you here, but by the actual authorities who are going to completely weigh in and crush the corruption in and of this world imminently. Doesn't matter what the those who get into public office do or claim they're going to do or don't do, or any of the rest of you. You just can't continue doing it. That's not how it works in real reality. In a specious zone of falsified reality, that can be continued only for so long, and then it has to be squashed. So you've had your run, you've had your fun, you've had your time, and it's going to come to an end, just like it always does. And a majority of you are going to be thrown under the bus by those who have benefited from what you've done and who are your handlers and minders. And you're going to get just a taste of the justice you deserve when that happens. You'll be fortunate if all that happens is that you find yourself suddenly bereft of the assistance or benefits which accrued to you from these activities. You'll be lucky if that's all that happens. You could be scapegoated very